part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Full 40 College Basketball Podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network. I'm your host, Ben Billman, and on today's episode, the first half, we're going to review what happened over the weekend in the first and second rounds of the NCAA tournament. And in the second half, we're going to look ahead at the Sweet 16 and beyond. So let's start with a review of starting with the first round. And first of all, when I look at the tournament overall, if I have one gripe with what's happening this year is how late some of these games are going. I am surprised that the NCAA is starting some of these games after 10 o'clock. I am one that will stay up and watch every single game until it's finally over at the end of the night. But a couple nights last week, I was up until about 1 o'clock, even 1:30, waiting for some of these games to get over. I think the NCAA needs to look at that. I think they need to start the games a little bit sooner or earlier so that they don't go so late. Being a Tennessee fan, on Friday night this upcoming week, Tennessee's game doesn't start till after 10 o'clock on Friday night, which is just absurd. I don't understand how they expect fans to stay up and get interested in college basketball when games are going so late. So that is one gripe I have. Maybe it's this way every year, and I just forget that it's this way every year, but it does seem like this year it's worse than ever. So they need to really figure that out and come up with a solution. I think it just needs to be, instead of starting the games in the evening session at 7:15, 7:30, they need to move that up to 6:15, 6:30 to get these games over with as early as possible. Okay, so that's just an opening thought that I have going into a review of what happened in the first round. And starting on last Thursday, most of the games were business as usual. Teams like North Carolina, Arizona, Iowa State, Tennessee, all rolled through the first round, no problem. Illinois, Gonzaga, those teams also rolled through the first round. Texas looked very good, and Michigan State beat Mississippi State pretty easily. Some of the more exciting games, though, that happened on Thursday, and probably what has been the upset of the tournament, was number 14 Oakland taking down number 3 Kentucky. And Kentucky was one of those teams all season that struggled defensively, but offensively, multiple NBA prospects, Reed Shepherd and Rob Dillingham, looked like first-round lottery draft picks. And all of a sudden, in the first round against Oakland, they looked like they'd never played basketball before. They totally froze up. They looked anxious. Reed Shepherd only scored 3 points the whole game. And I think Kentucky fans start having to think about what is the future of Kentucky and John Calipari as the head coach. This is now the third straight year where they have lost in the first weekend. 2 years ago, St. Peter's took them down. Kentucky was a 2 seed. Last year, as a 6 seed, Kansas State took them down in the second round. And then this year, the 14 seed Oakland. And John Calipari makes it sound like the players are the ones that are anxious or can't handle the moment. But in reality, I think he's got to figure something out to change the culture of that program. I don't know exactly what it is, if he needs to bring in more experience, more upperclassmen through the transfer portal. But at this point, something just is not working there. The whole one and done thing that he's lived on for the past decade at Kentucky just doesn't seem to be working anymore. And I've got to think that Kentucky fans are just getting sick of just the rollover from year to year of the roster and just the uncertainty when it comes to March as to how these teams are going to perform when they have so many young guys that maybe are looking ahead to the NBA draft and a professional career overall. So Kentucky was the big upset of the tournament on the first day. 3 11 seeds also won on Thursday. Duquesne beat BYU, Oregon beat South Carolina, and North Carolina State beat Texas Tech. So 3 11 seeds over the 6 seeds. The closest one was definitely Duquesne versus BYU. Came right down to the end. But Oregon and NC State, both teams that won their conference championships, both teams that were bid stealers, which means that if they had not won their conference championships, they would not have gotten in. So good for them for both winning in the first round after having hot runs in their conference tournament. And then also the big game of the day, number 4 Kansas against number 13 Samford. And man, that game was close all the way through. Samford looked like they were going to have a chance with about 15 seconds to go. Samford got a clean block and had it going the other way with about 15 seconds down 1. But the referee called a foul when it was clearly a clean block. Kansas went to the line, hit 2 free throws, and basically sealed it. I feel awful for Samford, though, for as physical and as much fouling goes on in college basketball today. To have a clean block like that called off, it was just really unfortunate when it comes to that ending. So kudos to Samford, though, for sticking with Kansas on the first day in the first round. And then 2 other results, both 3 7 seeds. First of all, Dayton beating Nevada. Nevada was up by double digits in that game before Dayton made an incredible comeback to come back and win that game. Texas handled Colorado State in a 7-10 matchup by 12 points. And then who I thought might be a Cinderella darling, Drake, a 10 seed, unfortunately lost a close game to Washington State that came down to the final minute as well. So it was a really good first day. Again, I think Oakland stole the show on the first day when it came to the first round on Thursday. Going into Friday, 3 number 1 seeds blasted number 16 seeds with UConn, Purdue, and Houston all moving on. Marquette, the lone 2 seed that played on Friday, also won very easily over Western Kentucky after trailing by 7 at halftime, but Marquette turned it on in the second half and took over. And then also number 3 Baylor, easily dominated as well. The game of the day had to be Auburn, the 4 seed, versus Yale, the 13 seed. A lot of people had Auburn as a dark horse in the East region to potentially take on Connecticut and maybe Iowa State in the Elite 8. Bruce Pearl is known for getting hot in March. But the Ivy League, for a second straight year, last year it was Princeton, and this year it is Yale, who are hot out of the Ivy League. Yale plays a great game, very disciplined, and they take down Auburn. Auburn had their chances at the end of that game, including a 3-pointer at the buzzer that would have won the game for them. But instead, Yale takes down Auburn 78-76 to advance to the second round. That was the second biggest upset as far as seeding goes outside of Kentucky, the 3 seed, losing. Auburn, the 4 seed, lost. Some other 4 seeds that also played on Friday, Duke and Alabama pretty easily beat Vermont and Charleston, respectively. And San Diego State in a close one against UAB, the 5 versus the 12. So I really questioned going into the evening session on Friday. It seems like every year a 12 beats a 5 in the tournament, and I wasn't sure if it was going to happen, but then all of a sudden on Friday night, James Madison, the 12, beat Wisconsin, and Grand Canyon, the 12, beat St. Mary's, and all of a sudden the 12 seeds went 2-2 in the first round. Really quality wins for both of those teams, James Madison and Grand Canyon, and Wisconsin and St. Mary's, two teams that like to slow the ball down and are erratic when it comes to shooting, both went down in the first round as well. Clemson destroyed New Mexico, which surprised me a little bit after New Mexico came off the pretty incredible Mountain West Conference Tournament Championship just last week, but they folded in the tournament. The rest of the games, Colorado beat Florida. It came down to the final possession. Colorado hit a baseline jumper near the end of the game, and Florida, after coming back and making it a game, lost by 2. Northwestern versus Florida Atlantic went to overtime, with Northwestern getting extremely hot in the overtime period. And Florida Atlantic goes down after being the Cinderella who made the Final Four last year. And just over the weekend, we found out that Dusty May, the Florida Atlantic head coach, will now be the new head coach at the University of Michigan. Big upgrade to the Big Ten and a huge salary increase. So congratulations to Dusty May. I think he'll do really well there. And his era at Florida Atlantic comes to an end and really throws into question what is the future of the Florida Atlantic basketball program moving forward. In 8-9 matchups as well, Texas A&M is a 9, beat Nebraska fairly easily, and then also Utah State beat TCU very easily. So it was a very solid first round. In terms of conferences, the ACC looked great. Really got a lot of good teams through. The Big Ten looked okay, getting Michigan State, Illinois, Purdue, some of their strongest teams through. The SEC looked absolutely awful. Texas A&M got through, Alabama made it through, and Tennessee. But other than that, Auburn losing, Florida losing, Kentucky losing, just not a good first 2 days of the tournament for the SEC. On Saturday, we got into the second round, and there were a couple Cinderellas going into the second round, but unfortunately, overall, the Cinderellas did not perform very well in the second round. So on Saturday, the number 1 seed North Carolina easily got by Michigan State, and Tom Izzo's kind of weird season for Michigan State never quite found a flow to that season, and so they go down to North Carolina, who looks very good going into the Sweet 16. Arizona-Dayton was a fairly close game for a while, but Arizona was able to pull away near the end of the game. Again, they look like a very strong team heading in to the Sweet 16. Iowa State handled Washington State. Iowa State defense continues to be their calling card. They held Washington State to 56 points, and they look like they could give UConn potentially a run for their money in the Elite Eight if they can get to that point. Tennessee took down Texas in one of the ugliest games of the second round. Tennessee shot 3 for 25 from three-point range. Texas did not shoot any better, though, and that game came down to the wire. Tennessee pulled it out, but if Tennessee doesn't get going in the Sweet 16, it could be a disaster and a real train wreck when it comes to their game this upcoming weekend. Illinois destroyed Duquesne. Not a huge surprise there. Terrence Shannon Jr. Again, just looks like he's unstoppable as an individual at this point. It's going to be a question whether other players on that team can come along with him and make a deep run, but they are on to the Sweet 16. Gonzaga, the 5 seed, beat Kansas by 21 points. Kansas finally, the injuries that they've incurred over the past few weeks finally caught up with them, and the Jayhawks go down. But then the 2 best games of the day, number 3 Creighton beating number 11 Oregon in double overtime. Just great play from both of those teams. Oregon easily could have won that game many times, and Creighton got hot when they needed to. They ended up winning by 13 in double overtime, and I think Oregon just kind of ran out of gas after a pretty incredible run to get to the second round. Creighton has to play better, though. They did not shoot the ball particularly well up until near the end of the game and in overtime and double overtime. And then the team that beat Kentucky in the first round, Oakland, still played incredibly well. Looked like for a while they were going to beat North Carolina State and be a 14 seed in the Sweet 16. Man, I think everyone in America was cheering for Oakland at that point. But unfortunately, the game went to overtime, and North Carolina State ended up pulling out the game by 6. But it really came down to the wire. Oakland had a couple shots near the end that just did not fall. NC State hit some pretty clutch free throws, and in the end, NC State advances as an 11 seed to the Sweet 16, and in the process also becomes the only double-digit seed heading into the Sweet 16. Now, when they won that game on Saturday, they had won 5 games in 5 days to win the ACC tournament, then went into the NCAA tournament and won 2 games in 3 days. So over the span of about 12 days, NC State has won 7 games in 12 days, which is just phenomenal. One of the hottest streaks I've ever seen in college basketball. And the question becomes, can they keep that up heading into the Sweet 16 when things get a lot tougher? And I'll talk about their matchup coming up in the second half. On Sunday, much of the same when it came to some of the top seeds. Purdue looked incredible against Utah State, winning by 39 points, and it looked like they controlled that game from about the 15-minute mark of the first half on. Zach Edey looks great. That team looks great. And any questions about if there would be any hiccups early in the tournament like they had last year in the first round against Fairleigh Dickinson, those questions were answered, and Purdue looks like a juggernaut going into the Sweet 16. UConn as well looked great in their second round matchup against Northwestern, and I have no doubt that they're going to be at the top of their game for the rest of the tournament, and we'll see how far they go. A couple close games. First of all, Houston-Texas A&M was the game of the day on Sunday, with Texas A&M coming back. They were down by double digits with just a couple minutes to go in the game. They make a wild comeback, and with just under 2 seconds to play at the end of regulation, they hit a three-pointer as time expired to send that game to overtime. Houston ended up winning in overtime, but it was a real scare for Houston, and I think it puts a real question mark around how much will they have and how good are they heading into the Sweet 16. Marquette, the 2 seed, pulled off a close game against Colorado in a game that looked like Colorado might win, but Marquette rallied, and Shaka Smart has his team in the Sweet 16 after losing last year in the second round. They look shaky, but I know with their guard play they can get it going at any time. Clemson beat Baylor. The ACC, again, looks like a conference that has a lot of solid teams, and Clemson, the 6th seed, took down Baylor. The 4 seed Duke destroyed James Madison. Alabama beat Grand Canyon, and San Diego State beat Yale. So 3 of the Cinderellas, James Madison a 12 seed, Grand Canyon a 12 seed, and Yale a 13 seed, even though they were all able to win in the first round. They must have just used up all their energy in the first round because none of them really showed up in the second round. So Duke, the 4 seed, Alabama, the 4 seed, and San Diego State, the 5 seed, advance to the Sweet 16. So that's an update on what happened over the weekend in the first and second rounds of the NCAA tournament. And when I come back in the second half, we'll do a Sweet 16 and beyond preview.
Hi, everybody. It's John Tellage from the Guardians of the Land MLB podcast. Be sure to hop on with us to follow all the dramatic developments of the reigning American League Central Division champions. From game analysis to interviews to keeping tabs on who could be the next breakout star. We'll have that and much, much more right here. It's the Guardians of the Land MLB podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network. Subscribe here and join the fun.
Hey everybody, it's Sam Amico from Cavs on the Break NBA podcast. Be sure to give us a listen for all your Cleveland Cavaliers recaps, analysis, breakdowns, draft talk, free agency. The list goes on and on. Give us a listen, Cavs on the Break NBA podcast.
Welcome back to the second half of the Full 40 College Basketball Podcast. If you missed it, the first half we reviewed everything that happened in the first and second round of the NCAA tournament. And we had some great games, but no necessarily buzzer beaters. Texas A&M did send their game to overtime against Houston on a buzzer beater. But other than that, we really missed out on some of the thrilling finishes that we have seen in recent years. And other than North Carolina State, who's an 11 seed, I wouldn't say there's any other Cinderellas necessarily left. And I don't know if I even consider NC State a Cinderella, knowing that they're from the ACC. They've had success before, and overall they've got a pretty high level of talent, being from a Power 6 conference. So at this point, it doesn't seem like there are any real teams that could say that they are a Cinderella or that nobody expected them to be here, which means that going forward, I think every single game from here on out is going to feature two teams that have to feel very confident that they can move on. And I think every team to an extent from here on out has to feel pretty good that the Final Four or a championship run, at least in part, is possible. So let's start with Thursday, the first day of the Sweet 16, and there are going to be 4 games that night. We'll start off, and I'll give you who the game is and then also who I think is going to win. So to kick things off on Thursday night, number 2 Arizona is going to play number 6 Clemson. Now, Clemson has been up and down all season. They did struggle at some points during the year, but they do seem to have found their momentum and their stride here in the NCAA tournament after a pretty ugly ACC tournament and a couple bad losses near the end of the year as well. But taking down a Baylor team that was very strong in guard play was very impressive. But on the other hand, we have Arizona. Arizona took down Dayton in what was a fairly close game, but I never felt like Arizona was in danger of losing that game. I think Arizona is the better team. They got over that hump of winning in the first weekend after losing as a 2 seed to Princeton last year in the first round. So Arizona has gotten over their demons, and I think they will move on to the Elite Eight, and they will be 1 game away from the Final Four. Arizona over Clemson. The second game of the night is actually a repeat of last year's national championship game. UConn, the number 1 seed, against San Diego State, the number 5 seed. So San Diego State is the only team remaining from a very strong Mountain West conference this year. They got 6 teams in to the NCAA tournament, but only 1 to advance to the second weekend. And even though San Diego State is a great team. I don't think they're as good as they were last year. And even though Connecticut lost 3 starters after last year's team, I think they are better than last year. So the rematch of last year's national championship is going to go to Connecticut again. They won the championship last year, and they look like a fantastic team after taking down Northwestern fairly easily in the second round this year. I'm going to advance Connecticut to the Elite Eight. The next matchup on the night is North Carolina, the 1 seed, against the 4 seed Alabama. So Alabama is coming off a very crazy game against Grand Canyon in the second round. They have one of the best offenses in the country. Defensively, it's going to be a struggle against a North Carolina team that has a lot of experience, a lot of depth, and players who know their roles and seem to be fitting into those roles perfectly at this time in March. I'm going to go with North Carolina. They've played very well so far in the NCAA tournament, and I just don't think that Alabama is going to keep up with them. Even though Alabama can score the basketball, I don't think they can stop North Carolina when Carolina has the basketball, and so I have the Tar Heels advancing to the Elite Eight. And then the nightcap, Illinois versus Iowa State. Iowa State, the 2 seed, Illinois, the 3 seed. Both of these teams have looked very good so far in the NCAA tournament. It's really going to come down to Terrence Shannon and what he does in this matchup. If he plays well, if he's hovering right around the 30-point mark in this game, I think Illinois wins. But if he struggles, Iowa State is probably going to roll over Illinois. I think Shannon has a great game, but I think Iowa State is the better overall team, and I think Iowa State is going to advance to the Elite Eight, where they will take on Connecticut. So after the Thursday games, I think Connecticut and Iowa State will end up playing in the Elite Eight, and then I think Arizona and North Carolina both advance to the Elite Eight. That will be the 1 versus the 2 in both of those regions. And just of note, I cannot remember the last time that all the number 1 seeds and all the number 2 seeds all advanced to the Sweet 16. There were no upsets in the top 2 lines, and that is pretty rare that all those teams get through. But I'm going chalk with the 1 versus the 2 in both the West and the East on that side of the bracket. So moving on to Friday, the second day of the Sweet 16, the first game of the day or of the night will be number 2 Marquette against number 11 North Carolina State. So again, if you want to call a team the Cinderella, I guess North Carolina State would be that team. Even though they're from the ACC and even though they did win the ACC championship, the tournament championship, I guess you could still call them a Cinderella. I think their run comes to an end, though. I think there's something special about this Marquette program. After last year falling to Michigan State in the second round, and the way Tyler Kolek is playing, they look like a team on a mission. They're very balanced. They have great play across the board, and I think NC State and their run of 7 wins in a row comes to an end against the Golden Eagles, and Marquette advances to the Elite Eight as the 2 seed. The second game of the night, Purdue versus Gonzaga. Purdue, along with Connecticut, those 2 teams have played the best basketball in this tournament so far. Purdue looks absolutely dominant, and again, after falling to Fairleigh Dickinson in the first round last year, they look like they are rolling at this point in the season. Gonzaga, incredible turnaround from where they were at the beginning of the year. This team, halfway through the season, there was a question whether or not they would even be in the tournament. Not only did they get in, They were a 5 seed, and they have advanced to the Sweet 16. This is 9 straight Sweet 16s for Gonzaga and for Coach Mark Few, which is just incredible. A lot of people say that Gonzaga has never reached the heights of what people expect, but 9 Sweet 16s in a row, 2 Final Fours, 2 national championship appearances. It doesn't get much better than that. I do think, though, in this matchup, they are just too overpowered, and Purdue advances easily to the Elite Eight. The third game of the day is Houston, the number 1 seed, versus Duke, the number 4 seed. This is my first, I guess you could say, upset of the Sweet 16. Houston looked very shaky in that matchup in the second round against Texas A&M, and Duke looks like they are hitting their stride at the right time in the NCAA tournament. Duke has had some great players step up. Houston looks like they are going down a notch. You might remember the Big 12 championship game. They got destroyed by Iowa State. And then just a few days later in the second round of the tournament, Texas A&M takes them down to the wire in overtime. I'm going to choose Duke, and I think Duke, John Shire, the new coach there, this is kind of the first run of his career, and so I think this will kind of be the passing of the torch from Coach K's career. Now John Shire is proving that he can advance this team far, and that the drop-off from Coach K to John Shire is not as bad as a lot of people would have expected. I have number 4 Duke over number 1 Houston. And the final game in the Sweet 16 on Friday night is Creighton versus Tennessee. Tennessee, the 2 seed, Creighton, the 3 seed. Both of these teams played very inconsistent basketball in the second round. Tennessee against Texas was probably the ugliest game of the tournament so far, and Creighton-Oregon game was a great game, but Creighton had their chances to pull away. They couldn't do it, and in the end it took double overtime for them to take down the Oregon Ducks in the second round. I think Tennessee finds their footing in this matchup in the Sweet 16. I think their guards are able to play a lot better, a lot more depth. They play great defense, and I think they're going to be able to shut down some of Creighton's three-point threats. I think this is going to be a very close game, maybe the closest game of the Sweet 16, but I'm going to give the nod to Tennessee to move on to the Elite Eight. So after Friday, I will have Duke and Marquette advancing to the Elite Eight in the South region, and Purdue and Tennessee, the 1 and the 2 seeds, advancing in the Midwest region. So moving on to the Elite Eight, on Saturday, North Carolina will take on Arizona in the West region. Again, the number 1 versus the number 2. This game is going to be fantastic. Both teams have great guard play. Both teams are very well coached. North Carolina has been to the Final Four a number of times in the past decade. Arizona has been on the precipice multiple times, but they have yet to break through to the Final Four. In this matchup, it's going to be very intriguing having R.J. Davis, one of the best players over the past couple years at North Carolina, go up against the former Tar Heel Caleb Love of the Arizona Wildcats. So a former teammate going up against his former team. I think that will be the storyline of this game, and I think the Tar Heels are able to bring this home. The number 1 seed here, they have kind of been under the radar most of the season, snuck into that 4th number 1 seed. Even though they lost to NC State in the ACC tournament, I think they lock up a spot in the Final Four. The first team to do so, North Carolina, the 1 seed, into the Final Four out of the West. In the East, Connecticut the 1 seed against Iowa State the 2 seed. I don't know if there's a team playing better in America than Connecticut, and I don't know if there's a team playing better in the nation than Iowa State. Probably 1 and 1A when it comes to teams and the way they're playing in March. Iowa State has looked incredible for the last month, but so has UConn. Both conference tournament champions. Both have played very well in the first and second round, and in the Sweet 16. I think they'll both play well. I'm going to give the nod to Connecticut because of their tournament experience. I think Dan Hurley is going to have this team ready to play in that game. But kudos to Iowa State. They've had an amazing year, play some of the best defense in the country. And I think TJ Otzelberger is going to be a coach to keep an eye on for bigger jobs around the country. Maybe not this year, but next year. He's got a bright future, and the things he's done at Iowa State have been pretty incredible. Now, looking at the other side of the bracket, first of all, number 4 Duke against number 2 Marquette. Again, I think that John Shire has finally kind of taken over the torch for Coach K. To get to this point in the NCAA tournament, a lot of Duke fans, and I think a lot of college basketball fans in general, weren't sure if John Shire was going to take over this program and do the job he needed to do that Coach K had done for decades. But not only has he done that, but with an Elite 8 run, I believe this year that he will prove that he was the right choice. And this is, though, where his run is going to come to an end. And Duke is going to fall to a Marquette team that, again, got over the hump by getting to the second weekend. They're going to win against NC State, and I think they take down Duke in the Elite 8 to advance to the Final Four for the first time since 2003 when Dwayne Wade led them to the Final Four. It will be Shaka Smart's second Final Four after leading VCU to the Final Four in 2011. Marquette's going to be a fun team to watch, and they're going to represent the Big East, the second team out of the Big East along with Connecticut in the Final Four. And then finally, Purdue versus Tennessee, the number 1 versus number 2 teams in the Midwest. Purdue just looks really good right now. And in my original bracket in this matchup, I had Tennessee winning. But after seeing the way these two teams played in the first weekend, I'm going to have to change my pick. Zach Edey, the National Player of the Year, going up against Dalton Knecht, who made first team All-American. That's going to be a major storyline in this game. But the way Purdue is shooting the ball right now, the way Edey is dominating around the rim, and just the struggles of Tennessee, both in the SEC tournament. They lost the last game of the regular season to Kentucky and then barely beat Texas in the second round. I think they do get by Creighton, but I think this is the end of the road for them, and they're going to lose to the Purdue Boilermakers. So in my Final Four, I have 3 number 1 seeds. First of all, Connecticut taking on North Carolina on one side, and then the number 2 seed Marquette taking on that third number 1 seed Purdue on the other side. In the first game of the Final Four, Connecticut versus North Carolina. Lots of intriguing matchups here. Obviously, North Carolina made the Final Four and the championship game in 2022. And Connecticut, again, this is their second Final Four in a row. I'm going to go with Connecticut in this game. They're going to get back to the national championship. Dan Hurley has this team rolling, and again, I don't think he's going to have them let down at all in any of these games. North Carolina, great run. Armando Bacot, RJ Davis have had incredible careers at North Carolina, but I think it comes to an end here against the UConn Huskies, who advance to the national championship in Phoenix, Arizona. And in the other matchup, Purdue versus Marquette. Purdue is just playing too well right now. The basketball level they're playing at is incredible. Zach Edey is proving why he's the 2-time National Player of the Year. The guards Smith and Lawyer are playing fantastic basketball. And any questions about Matt Painter or this program as a whole are going to be answered. Marquette's a great team. Congratulations to Shaka Smart for getting them to the Final Four. But I'm going to go with the Purdue Boilermakers to advance to the national championship game against number 1 Connecticut. So 2 of the 3 teams that all season looked like the teams at the top. Of course, Houston was in that group for most of the year. But Connecticut and Purdue, the most quality wins on the season, 2 teams that dominated in the regular season of their respective conferences, and both, I think, are going to roll into the national championship. I'm going to give the slight edge in this game to the Purdue Boilermakers. They have looked so good all season. All the games they have lost have been either on the road or super close. They're battle-tested at this point. They've been through everything, and I think they match what Virginia did back in 2018 and 2019, going from losing in the first round as a number 1 seed to winning the national championship the next season. So I'm going to go with the Purdue Boilermakers to beat the Connecticut Huskies in the national championship. Well, it should be a great second weekend of basketball with the Sweet 16 and the Elite 8 coming up in just a couple days. I will be back early next week to review what happened this upcoming weekend and then do a Final Four preview once we get to Phoenix, Arizona. Thank you for listening to the Press Play Podcast Network. To follow us on X, look up Press Play Pods. For sponsorship plans and more information, please email admin@pressplaypodcast.com. And to listen to all our shows and learn more about our network, please visit www.pressplaypodcasts.com.